There are a few things I'd love to underscore or reiterate because I think they're very astute and very helpful. And certainly, if I had had some of these reframes, I think that I would have been able to be proactive with working on a lot of my own issues much, much earlier.
Mm-hmm. Me too, by the way.
Yeah. For instance, we can come back to this. I'm actually just going to mention two things, and then we can go where that takes us. But the first is, rather than asking why the addiction, asking why the pain. Right?
Exactly.
So instead of looking at the consequences, looking at the causes.
Yeah.
And not confusing the symptoms with the causes. So instead of asking why the addiction, asking why the pain. And then I'd really love to hear what you do with patients once you start looking at their pain and the tools you use or the approaches you use. But one of the epiphanies for me in the last very recent year or two has been looking at my coping mechanisms very differently. And what I mean by that is, for a very long time, I had certain behaviors, certain defaults that I hated, which of course means I'm hating a part of myself.
That's right.
And that included anger, rage responses, use of stimulants, you name it. A close friend of mine who is a therapist, but I've never engaged him as a therapist. And there are certainly plenty of bad therapists out there, which I think is a separate topic. Nonetheless, he was helping, and I'm sure we'll get back to this, but in preparation for a very controlled, supervised psychedelic experience, he was helping another friend of ours prepare.
Is this with MDMA?
This is with ayahuasca.
With ayahuasca, okay.
And this person had addictions. And she hated these addictions. And it was all a negative relationship to these behaviors. And he said, did these ever serve you? Did these ever help? What did these do for you?
Exactly.
And she described how they helped her cope with very difficult circumstances early on. And he said, perhaps what you should do as an exercise, and what we can do, is for you to effectively thank those behavior for the role they played and for the necessity they filled, and to then recognize, thank them for their duty effectively, but to let them go because they're no longer needed. And that was a huge eye-opener for me. And I began to use something called loving kindness meditation, or metta, M-E-T-T-A meditation, which I was introduced to.
Of course.
But I never applied it to myself. I always applied this loving kindness meditation to other people.
To others.
And what was recommended is that I apply that loving kindness to the younger Tim, to the other versions of Tim who had these behaviors that I had grown to hate and resent, and to actually thank them for the role they played. For instance, that rage, that anger was the fuel that got me out of Long Island. And I got out because I was angry. In part, I think that was the fuel, but that fuel ended up over the long term being very corrosive. But in a way, to reconcile myself with that, I had to stop resenting it. But once you have shifted the focus from why the addiction to why the pain, and you start to work with someone, what approaches have you found to help? What tools?
Well, so I very much salute your friend's approach. It's exactly what the approach I would take myself. And I call it compassionate inquiry. So inquire in a compassionate way. Not why did I do this, but why did I do this?
Right.
The first one is not a question, it's a statement, it's a self-condemnation. The second one is a question. Wonder why I did this. It soothed my pain. And so what your friend said, that it served you, so thank it, love it, but let go of it, is absolutely right. I call it the stupid friend. The stupid friend is the one who helped you in a particular way at a certain time, but it can't learn that way doesn't function anymore.
Right.
That instead of helping, now it's hurting. So it's a friend because it's really trying to help, but it's stupid because it's not learning that you're no longer that 3-year-old or that 5-year-old or that 15-year-old. So there's a great link between ADD and addictions, and not just because they both begin with the same 3 letters. And I can tell you about my own ADHD. And this is where we go back to childhood again. So that tuning out, that absent-mindedness, that desire to scatter your attention all over the place, that's not a disease. Mm-hmm. They say it's an inherited disease. The hell it is. That tuning out, that divided attention is actually... But let me give you a personal question again. If I were to become abusive towards you right now, mm-hmm. verbally or otherwise, what would be your options right now?
I could ignore.
But that's not what you would do first, is it?
Not likely. I mean, right now, I would probably just listen and pause. I shut down often if I get attacked verbally because I don't want to respond with rage, which has historically been my response.
I hear you, but let's get a bit more basic about it. Mm-hmm. The rational response, if I were to become abusive, would be for you to just assert yourself, saying, don't talk to me that way.
Right.
Or it would be to leave, saying, right. This interview is over. Mm-hmm. And if for some reason you had not the strength to do either of those, there's other people in the room here with us, you could ask for help.
Right.
But what if you couldn't escape, fight back, or seek help? Then you would shut down or tune out.
Right.
In other words, the tuning out is simply a defensive response on the part of the brain. Now put me back into my infancy, when my mother is so grief-stricken that I'm crying because she's in pain. And I'll read you a quote here, if I may.
Yes, please.
And this has to do with the sensitive child. The child is very open and can feel the pain and suffering going on in its immediate environment. The child is aware of its own body and can also feel the tension, rigidity, and pain in the body of the mother or of anyone else he's with. If the mother is suffering, the baby suffers too. The pain never gets discharged. The organism does not develop the confidence that it can regulate itself, that things will happen the way they should. Hence, lack of optimism. Okay, now, my mother didn't abuse me. She did her best to look after me, but she was stressed, depressed, terrorized, grief-stricken. I'm picking that up as a sensitive infant. Can I fight back, change the situation, or escape?
No.
None of those. What can I do? Nothing I can do. My brain will tune out as a way of dealing with the stress. So I'm not talking about abuse here. I'm just talking about stress mothering or parenting. The child's brain then will tune out. When is the child's brain tuning out? When the brain is developing. So the tuning out then becomes programmed in as the default setting. And that's why ADD. So it's not an inherited disease. It's not a disease at all. It begins as a coping mechanism, which then gets programmed into the brain. And as a lot of these early coping mechanisms function, they help you in the short term create problems in the long term. And that's ADD is one of these examples. And of course, it also makes you more prone to be addicted, because now when you tune out, life becomes less interesting. You shut down emotionally, you protect yourself. Now you feel depressed. What does depression actually mean? You said you were depressed. What does depression mean? To depress something is to push it down. What do people push down in depression? They push down their emotions. Yep. Why would they? Because the emotions are too painful. So even depression becomes as a coping mechanism. You push it down so you don't feel the pain. But then later on, that interferes with your life functioning. So it all begins as a coping mechanism, and later on becomes a source of dysfunction. And all this is happening when the brain is actually developing.
A number of things I'd really like to underscore because you mentioned them, and I'd like to reiterate their importance. And also how they transcend the plant medicine work, the psychedelics. The first is, you mentioned intentions, and I'll just share my experience and also a number of recommendations that helped me tremendously with plant medicine work, but then life in general, which is you set a clear intention, but the clear intention is not the same as an expectation.
That's right.
And if you go in and you have an expectation you can't let go of,
that's right.
Many people end up trying to white knuckle the experience. And
that's true in general in life, and it's very true for plant experiences. Yeah. So if you get there that this is going to happen, this should happen, and some people sit there the whole night resisting their experience because it doesn't meet their expectations.
Right. So there's a card. It's a little card that I was given as a gift, which I didn't come to appreciate fully until maybe a year or two ago. I've been carrying it a long time. And it says, the task which hinders your task is your task. And if you think about that reframe and how to view something that perhaps historically you would respond to as a problem or an annoyance or offensive, to view that, and there's certain times when you have to fight and stand up for yourself. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I think that in my case and in the cases of many folks, we fight too often. We wear ourselves out. We get upset too often. How can you view that as a gift? How can you view that as your work?
Well, can I again give you a quote?
Yes, please.
Which I love. It's from one of my favorite teachers, and his name is A.H. Almas. And he says, your conflicts, all the difficult things, the problematic situations in your life are not chance or haphazard. They're actually yours. They're specifically yours, designed specifically for you by a part of you that loves you more than anything else. The part of you that loves you more than anything else has created roadblocks to lead you to yourself. You're not going to go in the right direction unless there's something pricking you in the side, telling you, look here, this way. That part of you loves you so much. That part of you loves you so much that it doesn't want you to lose the chance. It will go to extreme measures to wake you up. It will make you suffer greatly if you don't listen. What else can it do? That's its purpose. And I found this to be true of physical illness and mental problems and everything. You got to see, what is the teaching here? So we can look at all these things as problems to get rid of, which is what the personality wants to do, or we can look at them as learning opportunities, which is what your true self wants to do. Now, two things. One is you talked about intention in life. So my wife and I had a holiday recently in Costa Rica. Partly it was a working holiday, but partly it was just a holiday. Traditionally, we've had terrible times during holidays. Partly because of my workaholism, and once I go into a holiday, I just collapse. And now my wife is dragging a corpse around on holiday, because I hadn't cleared space. So this time, we actually went into the holiday with intention. This has nothing to do with psychedelics. Just to do that, we set an intention. What is our intention? And if we have an intention, I've learned from a couple of very wise teachers, what structures do we want to set up to support our intention? And how are we going to handle when there's kind of disagreement or conflict? We had a beautiful holiday because it was the first intentional holiday that we've had. So that intention in life in general is absolutely essential. Like every morning, what is my actual intention? Want to do a bit of an exercise?
Sure.
Okay, and then, if you don't like it, just tell me. When was the last, this is something I do in my groups or when I speak or so on, when I teach. So I ask people to tell me some recent episode when they're upset with somebody with their lives. And something that they're open to sharing. So it doesn't have to be anything sordid or thing, but just something, whether it's your spouse, partner, the bus driver, I don't care who.
Sure.
A friend.
Okay.
So are you willing to go there?
Anything.
Okay.
I can share anything?
Just where you were upset with somebody.
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so what happened?
Describe it?
What happened, yeah.
All right. There were a number of issues in my home, broken aspects of the home, things that were falling apart or needed to be fixed. Physically.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And I had hired someone to do these things while I was gone.
Okay.
And I came back and none of them were fixed.
Okay. And your emotional reaction was?
Anger.
Rage. Anger, okay. Anything else besides anger?
I think they're close cousins. Frustration.
Frustration is anger, yeah.
Yeah. I was disappointed.
Disappointed is sadness.
Yeah, it's a different feeling. So I was disappointed in myself also, because I started to look at how maybe...
Well, disappointed is not so much an emotion as a state of mind. I'm asking what the emotions were. What's inside disappointment? Something didn't happen, I wanted it to happen. How do I feel? Isn't there sadness there?
Sure. Yeah, there's sadness.
I'm not talking into it, I'm just asking.
Well, I suppose I might be confusing state of mind and states of mind and emotions, since I'm not sure how to delineate.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the raw emotion.
Yeah, sadness.
So there's anger and sadness. Those are the emotions.
Let's go with that. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you a silly question. What were you sad and angry about?
Well, I suppose the answer, which is not the right answer I'm expecting, was I was angry that someone had made commitments to me and not fulfill those commitments.
That's what happened. They had made the commitment and a problem, but that doesn't tell me what you were sad or angry about. What does that mean that they didn't fulfill their commitments?
Meant that they didn't care about me. They didn't they didn't respect me.
So they didn't care about you and didn't respect you. What kind of person doesn't get cared or respected?
I might need a lifeline here. I don't know. Someone who doesn't deserve to be cared for or respected.
Exactly. Somebody unworthy, right?
Sure.
Of respect and care. Okay? Now, if there are other people here, which there usually are when I do this exercise, I would ask them, okay, we just listened to Tim tell us about this experience. Are there other reasons why this other person might not have done the work that has nothing to do with him or her not caring about him or not respecting him? So what other reasons might there be?
1,000,001.
Name one.
Yeah, he could be in the hospital.
He could be in the hospital.
His
What else?
partner carried one. Could have been in a car accident.
Exactly.
He had a flight delay and got caught on Puerto Rico during a hurricane.
He's got ADHD.
Yeah.
He can't follow through. He's under stress and he couldn't.
Right. The email that I was supposed to send is sitting in drafts, and I thought I had sent it, but in fact, he never received it. I mean.
Okay, and any number of possibilities.
Yeah.
Now, of all the possibilities that you've just outlined, including that they don't care about you or respect you, which is the worst one?
The one I immediately defaulted to.
Right.
So the worst. If the guy's dead, then it's bad. But
but internally.
Yeah, internally, the worst assumption is the one that I immediately made.
Exactly. So let's notice something. I should say we, because we're all like this, we don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens.
Right.
Okay? That's what the Buddha said. It's with our minds we create the world. So that if you'd found out he had ADHD or he was stressed, or you might have been sad for him, but you would not have been angry and you would not have been sad. Okay? You might have, So, first of all, we don't respond to what happens. We respond to our perception of what happens, to our interpretation of what happens. Number one. Number two, of all the possible interpretations, we choose the worst one.
Yeah.
Number two. Thirdly, what I just said isn't true. We didn't choose it. It's not like you went through all these possibilities and you said...
It wasn't multiple choice and I chose option D.
Oh, no, he doesn't care about me. He doesn't respect me. You didn't do that. Your brain jumped there automatically, right? The question is why?
Yeah.
Now, here's the learning. First time in your life that you felt hurt and angry that when you perceived somebody didn't care about you or didn't respect you? Or has it happened before?
This is where the exercise might go sideways. I'm going to hit pause on that. I think that's probably for more of a conversation over wine.
But you'd probably agree it's not the first time.
It's not the first time.
Very good. And most people I talk to, it goes back way back.
Yeah, this goes way back.
Into childhood. Okay? And that's what trauma is. We don't respond to the present moment. We respond to the past. Now, but along the lines of our discussion, it's a beautiful learning opportunity. Now you get to know. Now, what if you assumed for a moment that you're the most lovable, most worthy of care, most worthy of respect person in the history of the universe? And this guy doesn't do your home. What's your response?
Any number of the other options which does not trigger an intense negative emotional state.
Yeah.
None of those other options would trigger that.
So something in you, I would argue, still believes that you're not worthy of care and respect. And that's what gets triggered. So who's the one that doesn't care about you and who's the one that doesn't think you're worthy of respect?
No, it'd be me.
It'd be you.
Yeah.
No, that's a learning.
No, it is.
And this is exactly what you're talking about. You're saying how these difficult things, how these problems are always teaching opportunities. And that's the beauty of healing, is that when you reframe things and you actually see the source within ourselves, all of a sudden, that's liberating. Because guess what? If you're feeling that way because this guy did this or didn't do that, that makes you a victim.
Yeah.
But if you see that you're the source, now you're powerful.
Yeah, you're empowered.
You're empowered, So This leads to the question of trauma, because it's one thing to recognize that all this originates in childhood pain. It's quite another to transform that pain. And for that, we have to understand what trauma is. So I want to say, first of all, that for trauma, you don't need terribly traumatic events. So there's two ways to look at trauma. One is that bad things happen that shouldn't have. But the other way to get traumatized is when good things didn't happen that should have happened. So when you look at that
trauma of omission.
Trauma of omission, where the parents, not that they didn't love you, not that they didn't do their best, but they were too stressed, traumatized, distracted themselves. Then you didn't get the kind of attention and the kind of acceptance and the kind of attuned being with that you needed. That itself can make you disconnect from yourself. The child needs that acceptance, that connection, that attunement. Our brain development requires it. Our emotional development demands it. And when we don't get it, not because the parents don't love us, but simply because of their own issues, we can also suffer that disconnection. So that's what I call developmental trauma. A human being has two fundamental needs, apart from the physical needs, in infancy, in childhood. One is for attachment. Now, attachment is the closeness and proximity with another human being for the sake of being looked after, or for the sake of looking after the other. Now, human beings, as mammals, and even birds, are creatures of attachment. We have to connect and attach because otherwise we don't survive. If there's nobody that's motivated to take care of us, to attach to us that way, and if not motivated to attach to others, we just can't survive. One interesting thing is that the endorphins, which are the body's internal opiate chemicals, which heroin and all the other opiates resemble, they help to facilitate attachment. So if you take infant mice and you knock out their endorphin receptors so they don't have endorphin opiate activity in their brain, they won't cry for help and separate from their mothers, which would mean that they would die in the wild. And which goes back to what happens in childhood when there's stress and trauma, these endorphin systems don't develop. And then when people do heroin, it feels like a warm, soft hug to them. They feel love and connection for the first time. That's why it's so powerful. But so we have this need for attachment, without which obviously the human infant, who's the most helpless, the most dependent, the least mature of any creature in the universe at birth, cannot survive without the attachment. And that attachment relationship, given that we have the longest period of development of any creature, well into adolescence and beyond, attachment is not a negotiable need. But we have another need, which is authenticity. Now, authenticity, auto the self, means being connected to ourselves. Just knowing what we feel and being able to act on it. So, that means our gut feelings. So, let's look at how human beings evolved. For hundreds of thousands of years, and for 100,000 years or so of this species existing on Earth, how did we live? We didn't live in cities and houses and so on. We lived out there in the wild until very recently in human existence. Now, just how long do you survive in the wild if you're not connected to your gut feelings?
Not very long.
Not very long. If you start using your intellect instead of your gut feelings, you just don't survive.
Yeah.
So that's a powerful survival need as well. So attachment is a survival need. Authenticity is a survival need. But what happens if your authenticity threatens your attachment relationships? For example, as a 2-year-old, you get angry because you didn't get that cookie before dinner. But your parents can't handle anger because they grew up in homes when there was rageaholism and they're terrified at the very expression of anger. So they give you the message that good little kids don't get angry. The message you receive is not that good little kids don't get angry, but that angry little kids don't get loved. Because your parents are now sullen, they won't look at you, they talk to you in a harsh way, you're not getting loved. Not experiencing love at that moment. Now, but you got to stay attached. Guess what you're going to suppress? The authenticity every time. And this is how we lose connection to ourselves and to our gut feelings. So that, strangely enough, that very dynamic, which is essential for human survival in a natural setting, now becomes a threat to our survival in this more modern setting, where to stay authentic is to threaten attachment. And so we give up our authenticity, and then we wonder who the hell we are, and whose life is this, and who's experiencing all this. And this life doesn't and who am I really? And so that's where the reconnection has to happen. That's where the healing happens, is with that reconnection. But it's because of that conflict, that tragic conflict in childhood between authenticity and attachment that most of us face, that we lose ourselves and lose connection to our gut feelings. So people often think that trauma is what happens to you. But the trauma is not what happens to you. The trauma is what happens inside you. And as a result of these traumatic events, what happens inside you is you get disconnected from your emotions, and you're disconnected from your body, and you have difficulty being in the present moment, and you develop a negative view of your world, and a negative view of yourself, and a defensive view of other people. And these perspectives keep showing up in your life in the present because they're the stupid friends. And so the issue is not just to recognize what happened 10, 15, 30, however many years ago, but to actually recognize the manifestations in the present moment and to transcend them. And how do you do that? By reconnecting with yourself, by restoring the connection with your body primarily and with your emotions that you lost. And once you do, when you found these things again, then you have what we call recovery. Because what does it mean to recover something? It means to find it again. So what is it that people find when they recover? They find themselves. And the loss of self is the essence of trauma. So the real purpose of addiction treatment, mental health treatment, any kind of healing is reconnection.